So earlier in the Oregon healthcare experiment, we saw that there was huge non-compliance. So we took our people, we randomly split them into two groups. Receive Medicaid, don't receive Medicaid. But among the people assigned to enroll in Medicaid, only 30% actually did enroll. 70% did not. These people did not comply with their treatment assignment. And that's a problem for learning about treatment effects. Now, we talked about 4 ways for dealing with this. The first is to do intention to treat analysis. And that's what we did before, where we redefine our treatment of interest to simply be having the option of enrolling in Medicaid instead of actually receiving Medicaid. The second approach is assuming random compliance. And that is the people who enrolled in Medicaid were basically the same as the people who didn't enroll. They just randomly decided. When they got that form in the mail, they just flipped a coin, and if it was heads, they enrolled. If not, they didn't. Now that's probably not true, because you would think that the people who enrolled probably were sicker, had more health problems, whereas the people who didn't enroll might have been younger, healthier, and thought, well, you know, I'm young and healthy, I don't need medical insurance, whatever, and threw the form away. Okay? So we probably don't believe that assumption. The third approach is called instrumental variables analysis, and we'll talk about that in a later module. Now we're going to talk about the fourth approach called bounds analysis. And basically the idea behind bounds analysis is that our data is going to tell us what happens to the people who complied when they get Medicaid, but it doesn't tell us anything about these people who didn't comply. These guys didn't get Medicaid, so we don't know anything about what happened to them. So it's possible that they could all be at the extremes of whatever our outcome variable is. So we're going to look at depression. So it's possible that if these guys had actually complied and got Medicaid, that all of them would be depressed. Okay? It's possible. We don't know because they didn't actually get Medicaid, so we don't see in our data. That's a counterfactual. The counterfactual that they do get Medicaid. Okay? It didn't happen. Another extreme is that when they all get Medicaid, none of them are depressed. They're all super happy. Okay? We don't know which one of these is the case. So we're going to assume that all of them are depressed and then see what our analysis gets us. Or then we're going to assume that none of them are depressed, see what our analysis gets us. And those are going to give us 2 bounds for the actual effect of getting Medicaid. And the truth is somewhere in between. Okay? The truth is that if all of these people enrolled in Medicaid, some percentage would be depressed. It's just the problem is we don't know what that percentage is. But we do know that it's between 0 and 100%, by the definition of our percentage. Okay, so before moving on to remember what our data is, let's look at the control group, the people who were assigned not to get Medicaid. Well, fortunately, there's basically no compliance problem there. They were assigned not to get Medicaid, and about 100% of them didn't get Medicaid, like they should. Now, some people did manage to somehow enroll in Medicaid, even though they weren't supposed to, but it was a very small number of people, so we'll just ignore it for simplicity. Okay, so let me remind you of what our data is. We're going to look at the outcome variable percentage of people with a positive depression screening. And we looked at this before when we did the intention to treat analysis. So, and this is from table S1 in the Oregon healthcare paper. So over here I've written 2 groups. First, the control group, the people who were assigned to not get Medicaid, and because all of them complied, everyone in that group didn't get Medicaid. So those people, 30% of them had a positive depression screening. Okay. Now up here, I've got a very specific group, the people who were assigned to get Medicaid, and they actually enrolled in Medicaid. Okay, so these are the people who were assigned to and complied with getting the treatment. Among those people, 27.79% of people had a positive depression screening. Okay, so remember before when we did the intention to treat analysis, we just looked at the difference between these 2 numbers and got minus 2.21% as our average treatment effect of having the option of enrolling in treatment. And if we assumed random compliance, this would also be our average treatment effect of actually receiving Medicaid. Okay? So remember, with random compliance, the analysis doesn't change, only the interpretation of your number changes. Okay, but we don't want to assume that because of these reasons I mentioned earlier. So let's do the bounds analysis. Okay, so we've got two groups of, okay, so let's start out with the control group. For these people, we know exactly what the average outcome of when you don't get Medicaid is because there was no compliance problem. It's 30%. So if I assigned everybody out there in the population, the whole United States, to not get Medicare or Medicaid, then 30% of people would have a positive depression screening. Okay, but now remember the definition of our average treatment effect. It's the difference between the outcome, the average outcome when everybody gets Medicaid and when everybody doesn't get Medicaid. So we know one of those numbers, 30%. That's the average when nobody gets Medicaid. Okay. What about the other one? The average when everyone gets Medicaid. Okay. Well, because of random assignment, the people who were assigned to get Medicaid are a random sample of all our people. Okay. So if all of them complied, we'd be done. Okay. But not all of them did. So we've got to split them into two groups. Okay. We've got our first group, 30% of people, 3 over 10. Those people, we know what happened when they got Medicaid because they complied. So we know that for these people, the percentage of people with the depression screening was 27%. Now let's look at the people who did not comply, the 70% of people who didn't get Medicaid, even though they were supposed to. We don't know what would have happened to these people if they had gotten Medicaid. Okay, but let's look at the extremes. The one extreme is that they were all depressed. Okay? So 100% of these people are depressed. Well, if that's the case, then our overall average among the people who were assigned to get Medicaid would be about 78%. Okay? So that's just doing this algebra. Now let's look at the other extreme. Okay? So here, for the people who did comply, we have the same thing. We know exactly what happens to them when they get Medicaid, 28%. For the people who did not comply, suppose that none of them were depressed. They're all very happy. Okay, 0%. It's possible, we have no idea, because in our data, they actually did not get Medicaid. And we're asking, well, what if they did? So our data doesn't tell us anything. But we know that it can't be below 0%. So let's suppose it is. Well, if we do that, then this is just 0. And so we just get 3/10 times 28. That's about 8%. Okay? So what we've seen in this analysis is that if we took everyone in the US and we forced them all to get Medicaid, then the average, the percentage of people with a positive depression screening, the percentage of depressed people, would be between 78 and 8%. Okay? That's what our experimental data reveals. Now this is a big bound. That's a lot of numbers between there. But the reason is there's a lot of non-compliance. A lot of people did not get Medicaid. And now think about the even worse case where nobody complied, where we assigned a whole bunch of people to get Medicaid and none of them took it. Then in our data, we would not see a single person who had Medicaid. And yet here, we're asking, what if they did get Medicaid? Well, in that case, it'd be 0% to 100%, because our data just wouldn't tell us anything about what would happen if everyone got Medicaid. But fortunately, that's not our problem is not that extreme. So we actually have this chunk of people here who are tightening these bounds. Okay? But there is a lot of people, 70%, who didn't comply. So that's why our bounds are so big. Okay? Because that's all the data tells us. Okay. So let's put that together with our data from the control group and write down some bounds for the average treatment effect. Okay? So the average treatment effect could be as high as 78% if you had Medicaid, minus 30% if you didn't. That's from our control group. Okay, or approximately 50%. Okay, that means that if this was the case, then moving everyone into Medicaid would increase the amount of people depressed by 50%. It's a huge number, huge increase. Okay. Alternatively, let's look at the other bound. Could be 8% minus 30%, which is about minus 20%. So it could be that when we put everyone into Medicaid, the percentage of people who are depressed drops by 20%. That's a really big, good treatment effect, that we lower depression by 20%. Okay? So that's what our bounds analysis tells us, that the average treatment effect is between these two numbers, about 50% and minus 20%. And it's a big range because there's all this noncompliance. Okay, so we can't tell, is the average treatment effect 0 or not? We don't know because the bound includes 0. Is it positive? Is it negative? We have no idea because the bound includes numbers that are positive and it includes numbers that are negative. So even though we had a really nice randomized experiment, it wasn't perfect because there was so much noncompliance. And so that's a big constraint on our analysis. So this is one thing you can do without making assumptions like random compliance, which we don't believe, or without changing your goals, like doing intention to treat analysis. So to compare these bounds results, we got minus 20% to 50%. Intention to treat and random compliance would both give minus 2.21%. And later on, we'll see that if you do the instrumental variables analysis, you'll get minus 9.15%. Okay? So later on, we'll talk about why this number is not necessarily what you want either, because it's actually not the average treatment effect. It's the average treatment effect for just a small set of people, not for everybody. So unfortunately, there's no perfect answer, but that's just what happens when you have things like noncompliance in the data. So these problems arise in data analysis, and there's various ways of dealing with them. And this is the kind of thing you'll see when you go and look at the research and look at the literature.